Welcome back to Double Fries No Slaw. I'm joined by Mike Ferguson, our lead writer here at Double Fries No Slaw. Mike, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking just a minute and chatting with us. I wanted to do this quickly. You put out an article this week, a column just on the transfer wide receivers that Florida State has. The title of the article was "Can the Transfer Portal Do for FSU's Receiving Corps What It Did for the Pass Rush?" Obviously, in 2021, our pass rush was greatly enhanced by the addition of Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas. Both those guys are gone. And Florida State certainly, I don't know, hit the lottery, hit it out of the park, like whatever cliche you want to use, hit the nail right on the head with the Jermaine and the Keir pickups. And they look to do the same thing with the wide receiver core this year. Picked up 4 transfers, Johnny Wilson, Deuce Spann, Mycah Pittman, and Winston Wright Jr. Winston Wright, we know, coming back from a bit of an injury, a broken leg in a couple of places. But what are your initial thoughts on the wide receiver haul that Florida State has brought in for this 2022 campaign?
I think it's great. One thing I really like about the 4 new additions is they kind of have a diverse set of skills. Mycah Pittman and Winston Wright have both returned punts and kicks in the past, so that's an area where they definitely need a boost. But Johnny Wilson is 6'7". You always think about, when you see a guy that big, you think about someone in the red zone. I mean, that's a small forward, 6'7", big kid. And also, guys that size tend to be able to make those tough catches over the middle. And Deuce Wright, I think, only had 5 catches last year, but 3 were big plays and 2 were touchdowns. So you're also going to want to be able to get guys who can stretch the field. So I really like that they have 4 different players, but they're each kind of unique in their skill set.
It seemed like last year Florida State's wide receivers, and they were ranked 14 out of 14 by David Hale going into the season. David Hale of ESPN. I don't know. I thought the wide receiver play was just very hit and miss at times. Like I don't know what your big takeaway on the 2021 receiving core was. You had guys step up, and you mentioned him in your article, Ja'Kai Douglas. You had Pokey had a really nice game. Malik made a play here and there. Obviously, everybody's going to remember Parchment stepping up and making a really nice play against Miami. We mentioned again, Ja'Kai had a big nice play against Miami that set up the Parchment play. He had a big play against Notre Dame. So what were your overall takeaways with the 2021 receiving core?
Well, I don't think there seems to be this perception that they were horrible. I don't think they were horrible. The thing missing, though, is a go-to guy. When Andrew Parchman transferred from Kansas, I think in his last full season at Kansas, he had something like 900 receiving yards. He didn't have nearly that type of production, like you said. He had some big moments. Guys like Keyshawn Helton, Ontario Wilson made plays at times that, with those 2 guys, though, there's been some consistency issues. And also, Helton's had a really tough time staying healthy. So, I mean, it was a relatively deep core. I mean, a lot of guys played. You had a lot of guys in like the teens to the low 20s reception, but the thing missing was they didn't really have the go-to guy. I think Ontario Wilson was their leading receiver. He had like 382 yards, and that barely ranked in the top 40 in the ACC. I mean, that's your leading receiver, barely ranks in the top 40 in the ACC. And Cam McDonald, the tight end, I think was their leader in receptions with 24, and I think that was like 46th. So, I mean, that quarterbacks need a guy they can count on in big situations. And granted, some guys did make big plays in situations. We mentioned the Andrew Parchman 4th and 14 play against Miami. Ja'Kai Douglas had a big catch that, just got them into Miami territory. So guys did make plays, but I mean, this just seems like a team that, an offense rather, that could go so much further if it just had a go-to guy at receiver, like a Rashad Green in years past, and even as recent as 2018, I think Tamari Terry was kind of that guy.
Yeah. Terry and Tate, and we've had a couple that you'd certainly, if Tamori and Terry or Alden Tate were on this team right now, like they would easily be your one.
Right.
Obviously, you mentioned Rashad, he would be one. Heck, I think if Kermit Whitfield or Travis Rudolph was on this team, they'd probably be your number one.
Right.
It does feel like a room that had like 5 number 3 guys or 5 number 2s through 4s, right? Like maybe Malik and Pokey or 2 type guys, and Jakai's like a 4, and Parchment was he was kind of your one last year, but really never came to fruition, really never anything crazy there. So with the additions, you mentioned Johnny maybe in the red zone. Deuce Spann's made some big plays. They've actually been working him off at kick return and punt return at times. Are there, Pittman's done a lot of work on special teams as well, but they're saying he's having a nice camp. Is there anybody you're kind of expecting to be that number one? I know we all kind of had Winston Wright slotted there, and then, he breaks his leg in a tragic car, or not tragic, a horrible car accident. And fortunately, is okay and is practicing and is at fall camp, but can't expect, not sure if we're expecting him to be ready to go by week 0 or even week 1 or 2 in that number 1 capacity. So is there someone else you're looking at maybe stepping up this year if you had a magic 8 ball and you were shaking it today?
Like you said, I think Wright coming into the year is definitely the most accomplished. He had more than 600 yards receiving last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So he is the guy who really he's kind of the most proven of this bunch. But the guy I really like is Mycah Pittman, just because I think he's so versatile. I think you could see them throw bubble screens, receiver screens to him. I think you'll see him on some jet sweeps. He's a guy you want to get the ball in space. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somewhere near the 500-yard receiving mark this year, and maybe gets another 100 or so yards on rushes. And I think if he's healthy, you'll also see him in the return game. And if I remember correctly, he's averaged like 10 yards per punt return for his career, and FSU has really lacked in the return game. I think as a special teams, the unit was ranked like 126th or something by the FEI metric. So I mean, those guys could potentially help not just 1 but 2 phases of the game.
We talked about this a little bit off air. Yeah. And going back to punts. We weren't even catching the punt, right? Like we were like negative 15 yards every punt from where it hit and then would go backwards. We talked about the Miami game. I think that one we let bounce at like the 18 and it slow rolled over the goal line. And obviously if Miami downs the ball there at the 2, then, maybe, but you probably end up losing that game,
And think about the muff punt against Florida. Ontario Wilson
really cost you that. Yeah.
That was, I think it was a 7-7 or 10-7 game at the time. That really allowed Florida to kind of seize control of what was a defensive struggle where no offense can do either thing. That really provided a spark to the Gators. I mean, if that doesn't happen, or if, Wilson catches that punt, I think, maybe that game turns out different. Maybe they go 6-6. Maybe they win a bowl game. Maybe we're not talking about 4 straight losing seasons right now, so.
Yeah, special teams were an absolute detriment there. So having a wide receiver that can again just field a punt, I think would make FSU fans pretty thrilled. But you're right. Yeah, they punted that ball from their end zone with a 3-point lead. You kind of like yourself to get now. Credit to the kicker. We were lined up at about the 45, and he blasted it. And so Wilson tried to catch it over his shoulder. But Florida went from punting in their own end zone to having the ball on Florida State's 33-yard line, converted, made it 2 scores, and we never had the ball with a chance to win again. So we talked about this a little bit before we got going. I'll ask you this and wrap up. So I assigned some figurative numbers and figurative rankings to the last couple of years, defensive end rooms and wide receiver rooms. And I think if I had to rank it like on paper in 2020, I'd probably give our defensive ends like a 5 or 6. I mean, Kando and J-Rob were on those teams, and it's hard to really gauge 2020 because of how crazy that year was. And then obviously last year, if I was given a ranking to our defensive ends, I'd probably have it like an 8 or 9. So you're talking like a 3 to 4 point improvement, right, on the defensive end side. Last year's wide receivers, I'd maybe have it like a 2 or 3, right, like pretty low. So if our wide receivers this year could get to a 6, 7, you could potentially see a bigger improvement from the wide receivers than you saw from the defensive ends. Now, I don't think the wide receivers are going to be as good as the defensive ends were pound for pound, but because if it's a lower floor, you could see a bigger improvement. Where do you kind of project things to kind of like finish up? If you want to assign like a figurative ranking to these guys, you can. If you want to stick to something a little more concrete, you can. But how do you think the wide receiver room looks when we're doing this at the end of the year, projecting back, looking at it?
You'd have to think the internal competition is going to improve the room. That in itself. And we mentioned, we kind of talked a little bit each about the 4 new transfers, but the guys they have coming back they're not horrible. Pokey Wilson, Helton, 2 very experienced guys. And I think Malik McClain has the potential to be a complete receiver. The guy's 6'5". He can run. Josh Burrell didn't actually play much last year. I think he showed a lot of potential in the 2020 spring game. So I think the internal competition's not going to be good just for the newcomers, but I think it's going to help the returning guys as well. And really, you would hope that brings out the best in everyone. And when we were talking about the receivers, you mentioned that a lot of these guys on many rosters are number 3s, number 4 receivers. I mean, if someone can emerge having those number 3, number 4 receivers here, suddenly it's not such a bad thing. And so I think internal competition will weed out, the best players are going to play, and we'll see how this affects the veterans. We'll see how this affects the newcomers and some of the younger guys like McClain and Ja'Kai Douglas. They've made plays. It'll be interesting to see what their progress was. I mean, Douglas really helped stretch the field. He had the big play against Miami, had a long touchdown in the opener against Notre Dame too. McClain didn't really get into the lineup till the middle of the season, but he made plays when he did, and he just has all the intangibles. So we'll see. It's going to be. We talk so much about the 4 new guys, and not just me and you, but it seems like when the receiver room is mentioned, that's who comes up. But hopefully these guys can elevate the play of who's coming back as well.
It does feel like there are 7 or 8 guys in that room who all have in our minds, maybe Winston Wright's the exception, but with the injury, maybe that's taking him down a notch. But if you remove him, there's maybe 6 or 7 guys in that room that all have similar potentials, very different skill sets, but we all kind of think of them like if you're playing Madden or whatever, they're all like everybody on there's like an 81, right? Like everybody's between like a 76 and 81. Like nobody's like 89, nobody's in the 90s, nobody's down in the 60s. They're all kind of between that 75, 77 to 81-ish. They're just barely peaking above like a B minus maybe. And so it's wide open. And that's probably the best thing is that there's 7 or 8 guys in that room that you'd love to have a number 1. You'd love to have a Rashad Green. I mean, any team in the country would love to have a Rashad Green on it right now. But you do have a lot of options that you can kind of look at and lean on, and different guys can produce when that number is called, when that name is called, who's hot in that game. Think that could be really good. Who grows through the year. The diversity, just how much talent is in the room from a numbers perspective should certainly help that issue. Mike, I appreciate you taking some time and chatting. Where can people follow you? Where can they find your work? And give the people a quick rundown.
I guess the easiest way is to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Mike W. Ferguson. You can see the Ferguson spelling on the screen there. Everything I do, I post on there. I also have a Facebook page. Read one of our double slaw articles or double fries NOSLAW article. I made the same mistake that was made last week, but scroll to the bottom and there's a link to my Facebook page, or where you can just find all my work. So
awesome. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you loved it, hit the share button. We will be back with more content and kind of keep it fresh for you. Again, I appreciate Mike, you hanging out. Appreciate those that tuned in. We'll see you guys next time. Go Noles.
Thanks a lot.